Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Sherman. I'm the CEO of Ellementa. I'm also the author of the book, Cannabis and CBD for Health and Wellness, co-authored with Dr. Janella Chin. I love telling you about all the things we do, but actually right now, I just want to dive into this topic. We have so much to cover. This is the kind of topic that a lot of us don't always feel comfortable talking about. We're not really talking to our doctors or gynecologists or other health practitioners about it. We might be a little timid, particularly when we're talking about cannabis or CBD products. But now, when we're talking about personal female products, it begins to get a little challenging. Maybe not for all of us, and certainly not for Chelsea. Cebara, I forgot to ask you, is that how I pronounce your last name?
Yeah, Cebara, kind of like zebra.
Okay, Cebara. Chelsea Cebara, who is a product development expert, cannabis product development. She's also a sex educator. So she's the perfect combination to help us understand about sexual dysfunction and cannabis products. And that includes CBD products as well. And possibly we'll discuss just general sexual aids as well, because sometimes we use these things in combination.
That's yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I usually do. I don't read a bio. If you can just tell us a little bit more about your background, and then we'll just dive into the questions because we've got a lot of really good ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Again, I was able to work with Ellementa a little bit before. I recently struck out on my own, but my claim to fame is that I developed the world's first water-soluble, water-based THC personal lubricant, which is called Velvet Swing. Prior to that, I've been a medically certified cannabis consultant for a decade now, ever since.
Awesome.
Yeah, we got started legally in 2011, so I guess it's 9 years and change in Seattle, Washington. And I was doing that, I thought, as a stopgap while I built my adult sex education business. And it turned out it's actually pursuant to something that we were talking about before we went live, that as I was working in that job, I was seeing products show up in the dispensary that were developed by people who clearly know a lot about weed. You know, they know about cannabis, but they didn't understand sexual health, and they certainly didn't understand the vaginal biome. And so a lot of the products that I was seeing come into my shop were really bad news. And as a result of that, because I happen to be standing in the middle of the Venn diagram between sex education and sex health and sexual health and the cannabis world, I started teaching sex and cannabis workshops, and that eventually led to the job that I held up until very recently. I just struck out on my own, and so this is an area where expertise exists on both sides, but very, very few people are actually standing in the middle and can reconcile those two worlds. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that for you a little bit today.
I was muting myself because I forgot to mention to everyone, I have a toddler today without anybody helping with him. So I'm hearing him in the background. Hopefully his sister is going to help settle him down.
Yeah.
Hey, it happens.
I've got a 3-year-old as well. She's 3.5. So if you need to take a break, you take a break, girl.
Well, if I do step away, I know that you'll be able to carry on the conversation without me. Well, let's just talk about, first and foremost, why would somebody even consider using cannabis to enhance sex? And part of it is to enhance, and then the other part is to help, to aid in potential dysfunctions. So maybe just lay it out for us, the different kinds of situations or conditions where cannabis can be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of bifurcation of what you might use cannabis for kind of echoes the medical recreational conversation that we're having in the community right now. And while, I have opinions about that conversation, there is, in terms of applications for sex, there's this idea that you can use it for enhancement or you can use it to treat a state of dysfunction. And we'll talk about both of those, but fortunately, the mechanisms by which cannabis can address either of those concerns are very similar. So in any case, you're likely to get a little bit of both, and that's good. So I want to put a big old blanket disclaimer umbrella over my head because, of course, I want no one to take anything that I'm saying as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Thank you. I normally say that. I normally say that we are not medical professionals, and we're not diagnosing anybody individually, and we're not dispensing medical advice. I'm so glad you said that. I typically will do that. I sometimes do have doctors, but then the disclaimer is they're not diagnosing you.
Right. Yeah. It's never personal. It's not any direct thing. You have to follow up with your own care provider. And with that umbrella over, I'm just going to speak in generalities of what I have heard, and also my very intimate personal experience with using cannabis to treat my own endometriosis. So the basic idea here is that cannabis has what we call peripheral vasodilation effect. And that means that if you are inhaling it, which is the only data we actually have, due to a lot of stigma on both sides, we don't actually have the research study on topicals yet. I'm trying to get it done. But we're doing kind of a common sense inference here that this effect carries through to topicals as well. The peripheral vasodilation just means that cannabis tends to dilate the smallest blood vessels at the periphery, at the body, the little capillaries in your fingers and toes. If you apply it topically, what many, many people, mostly women, but men as well, have noted over a course of decades and decades, probably longer than that, but what we have records of is the last little bit here, that this enhances blood flow and sensation similar to the natural arousal response. So it's all about blood flow in terms of your body's sexual response. That's a simplification. It's not all about blood flow, but blood flow plays a huge role. Blood flow leads to engorgement. It leads to sensitivity enhancement, and it gets your body in the mood, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to be careful to say that cannabis itself is not a direct aphrodisiac. A lot of times people, and this, I teach still, the Sex and Cannabis workshop is by far my most popular content. So I teach that all the time. And almost every time there's a guy in the back whose hand goes up during the question thing. And he says, what are the strains that are going to make my wife horny?
Oh gosh. Yeah. And there is a strain that actually markets itself.
There is.
As that.
Yeah. And I raise a pretty big eyebrow at that. Oh gosh, now my cat wants to get out. Just go around. Goodness gracious. Half of the best part of this. Yeah. I'm just going to let her out one second.
Okay. This is definitely one of those mornings, one of those days.
Oh gosh.
One of those webinars. Hey, we're all doing the best we can. Okay.
Yes. So there's always this guy who asks about strains and the aphrodisiac effect. And while for many people cannabis does have that effect, most of the time you don't want to consider it something that's going to directly get you in the mood. What it does instead is remove barriers to you getting yourself in the mood. And,
right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because I know it can be relaxing. It can reduce some anxiety. Mm-hmm. It can sort of detach you from that negative voice in your head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good for that. Very good for that. And topically, it can get your body responding, and that kind of gets your brain on board a lot of times.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And, because if you put on a topical and you try to, go to a board meeting, you're going to have a hard time concentrating. And I think that that's in play as well. And I also do, I talk about topicals a lot because they're really what I'm very, very interested in this area. But we have these two things of, we have non-systemics like topicals, which are going to give you that localized effect. And then you have systemic stuff, which is, your smokables, vapables, and edibles. And there are reasons to use either or both, depending on what kind of experience you want to have. So yeah, all of them are going to have, under the right circumstances, an enhancing effect. But there are pros and cons in all the categories. So yeah.
Well, let's start then with the one, I guess, that many of us are least familiar with. I would venture to say a lot of people are familiar with smoking and vaping, taking edibles, and we can definitely go back to those and address pros and cons. But let's just go right into the conversation about lubes, about the topicals. And just from my own experience, I do a lot of reviews, testing them out for myself personally as well. I've seen an array of styles of topicals. So I've seen sprays. I've seen creams and ointments and things that you would just use your fingers and use that as for an application. I actually had a conversation with one woman who didn't like the idea of the sprays because she felt that women are so afraid to touch themselves and should be using those. And I found that like a really interesting perspective, but I was like, it's less messy. I wasn't worried about the touch or the not touch. I was just thinking sprays are kind of convenient. So talk to us about some of the types of topicals and just about them in general.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just light up talking about this because it's been so life-changing for me and for many, many people that I've spoken to. So you'll notice that when I talk about this, I say topical rather than lube. And that's because I try to say that. But the popular nomenclature is cannabis lube. And the reason that that's a little bit misleading is that while most of these products are lubricating, a lot of them do have a slick feeling to them. You don't use them in the same way that you do a lube. They're a topical to enhance sex, right? So instead of putting it on to decrease friction, you're putting it on and you really want to let it sit there for like 20, or if you can stand it, 40 minutes, because the more you can keep it just on your genital tissue, the better absorption what you will have. And that leads to a better effect. Personally, I have found that if you rush into things, that you will get that enhanced sensation, but you don't tend to get that enhanced orgasmic potential, which is something I didn't mention before, but hey, kind of a big deal. Longer, stronger, and more likely to be frequent orgasms. Yeah, that's also one of the things. So
not a downside.
Not a problem. So yeah, to really get that depth that you need in order to have that effect, you want to leave it on for longer. So think of it as a topical rather than a lube. And apply then as needed. If you're having a very long session, lucky you, and you need to apply more, that's great. You can use it as a lube and keep it going. But really, you want it to sit there as much as possible. And I say genital tissue, but it also could work on really any thin-skinned, densely vascularized area, such as areolas. Even the interior wrist or ankle are appropriate places for sensation enhancement using cannabis topicals. So let's talk about, like, as you asked, the different sorts. And there are a lot of different formats, but almost everything on the market is going to be based with oils, because cannabinoids, chemically speaking, are what we would call oleophilic, which is they love oils. They basically are oils. They like to hang out with other oils.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when people are making products, by far the easiest route is to infuse into an oil. We all know this because we've made canna butter on the stove, so it's the easiest, most low cost and effective route to do. And it has this lubricating quality, and many, many people enjoy using, for example, coconut oil or other oils as lube. So it just seems like it's sitting there, There are some really unfortunate downsides to using oils, and the reason why the product that I developed was really committed to being water-based. Most importantly, oils are not going to be compatible with any safer sex barrier. Condoms, gloves, dams if you use them. All of these things are rendered ineffective by oil-based lubricants. This applies to whether it's cannabis or not. So if you didn't know that, please know that and take it home and spread the word. That's not a problem if you're using other birth control and you're in a committed relationship where you have risk tolerances that are acceptable to both of you. Also, I wanted to say there are polyurethane condoms out there. They're called Trojan Supras, and I used to bill them as compatible with oil-based lubes. Trojan did actually issue a statement saying, please not to do that.
Whoa.
I actually still think it's fine, but I think Trojan is kind of covering their butts a little bit on that one. But they feel different, and they're a little bit less stretchy. So I used to do a demo with those, but technically Trojan says don't do that anymore. So
okay.
But yeah, so that's the big thing. The other thing is oils, you want them to be clean. You want them to be stored correctly. Every time that you are reaching in, if you are using one that you're using your hand for, you're introducing bacteria.
Right.
And so the spray has that benefit, even though it is a little more messy. I
don't find the spray. I don't find the spray to be so messy, but okay.
Yeah.
But that's what you're saying, is that spray is not as messy, so and you don't touch it.
You don't touch it, so it's a little cleaner.
So a little bit cleaner. Okay. So there is some advantage there, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm also cautious because when, just from my experience, knowing how little so many of the manufacturers know about the vaginal biome, I don't know that they're doing the best job of keeping things clean. So I oftentimes will advise people to make their own at home. If you're going to go the oil-based route, control the entire production process, and you can really fine-tune exactly what your product is going to be at the end. Because honestly, the oil-based stuff that you get in the store, I mean, that's all they're doing, baby. That's all they're doing. Some of them do use a CO2 extracted concentrate rather than infusing flour directly into oil, but that's actually a downgrade because CO2 obliterates some of the more helpful compounds in the entourage effect, as we say.
Right.
Which I'm sure are all the attendees going to be familiar with that term?
For the most part, everybody has probably attended, and we've talked a lot about cannabinoids, terpenes, full spectrum, the endocannabinoid system, et cetera. Really briefly, cannabis has cannabinoids and terpenes and other chemical compounds that interact really well with our body and a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system. If anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, we have lots of videos and articles that explain the chemical interactions, including the entourage effect, or as some people call it, the ensemble effect. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So that's pretty much everything you're going to find. I've seen a few, my own product, as well as there's been a couple on the CBD only side that are water-based, which is kind of the opposite of how I approach cannabis generally, which is they're highly processed. I like to keep things natural and pretty big hippie, but the process of making oil play nice with water and insulating those cannabinoids from interacting with latex or whatever your barrier is a lot. It's something that you can keep pretty pure, but it takes work. And the cost of kind of torturing it into doing what you need it to do is that you do lose some of that broad, array of cannabinoid, terpene, and flavonoid profile. So there's cost benefit. Oils are also staining. And for some folks, oils can hang out longer in the vagina, and they'll be more likely to cause an infection or an off-balance situation.
Maybe like a fungal infection of some kind, or
less fungal, usually more bacterial.
Bacterial infection. Okay.
Yeah. And when we talk about ingredients, I'll talk about a little bit more, but basically there are some oils which are inappropriate for vaginal use because they have a high wax content, and that wax content hangs out on the vaginal walls. Some people are never bothered by it. Some people, that wax gives a place for unfriendly bacteria to multiply. So you just want to be careful of your choices of oils. Most of them are totally fine as long as they're cleanly extracted. Most of them are totally fine. But I'll go over which ones when we talk about that.
Okay, I wanted to remind everybody that if you're watching live on Zoom, you can type in a question in the chat box and we will get to that as soon as we can. If you're on Facebook Live, apologies, we're not looking over there at the moment, but next time, sign up for the Zoom so you can be up close and personal with the experts. Now, a couple of other, so we talked spray, we talked a topical that like a cream or an ointment of some kind. But what about suppositories? Can you talk a little bit about suppositories? Because I've seen a lot of them on the market as well, marketed to women, vaginal suppositories. Could you talk about those?
Suppositories are again something that's pretty low tech. It's actually better if you're using the lower tech stuff, and you can make them at home as well. They're usually a blend of some kind of oil and cocoa butter. And while a little bit too waxy, they're actually designed to. Oh goodness! Now my kid. I'm so sorry, folks. I'll be right back.
Thank goodness it's not my toddler coming in at the moment.
Oh, that's my toddler. There you go. Okay, all right. Cats and kids and everything.
Cats and kids.
So suppositories are designed to melt slowly and deliver the actives slowly. And that's great if what you're trying to do is keep the medicine as close to your cervix for as long as possible. This goes directly into how you might use such a thing to treat menstrual cramps, endometriosis, or some kinds of sexual dysfunction that result in the over-tightening of the pelvic floor muscles and therefore painful intercourse. So a suppository would be inserted vaginally. You can also insert them anally, depending on what your needs are. However, used anally, if there's THC in there, you're probably going to get high, and you're probably going to get quite high. So just be prepared.
Wow.
For that.
I don't think I knew that. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Generally, any kind of topical isn't going to have an effect if it's used somewhere that isn't your digestive system. But if you put enough of it in your mouth or in your butt, you are putting it directly into the body that are designed to absorb and put stuff into the bloodstream. The vagina it does do that a little tiny bit, but that's not its purpose. It's not meant to absorb stuff into the bloodstream. Your digestive tract is. And so for oral sex or anal sex, if you're using these products, you are risking getting enough into your bloodstream to feel a psychoactive high if you're using THC.
And that could be the effect that you want. It could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And
but for many of us, it may not be. Yeah. And so knowing that ahead of time, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, you just want to be aware of it. So yeah, suppositories are really, really great for keeping those bioactives really close and in the place that you want them to be, and extending the amount of time that you might feel relief.
So one of the things that we mentioned very briefly before we went live was the idea that different products are available in different places, particularly when there's THC in them. And I just wanted to mention, to start off this little piece of the conversation, that in Alaska, there is a product called Bear Spray, Bare.
The names are so good.
So Bear Spray, and it was the first one that was created up here in Alaska and had to be approved as an edible because they had no category for anything else.
Yeah.
And then they pitched it as you could do both things. You could microdose by spraying it under your tongue, or you could spray it in other regions. And I found that very interesting too, because then in a sense, you could get a little bit of both effects. You can get that relaxation, that anti-anxiety, even that feeling of being high, but without being too high. And then you can have the blood flow and the other benefits of having a spray. So I found that really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about things that are available in one place, not? And so what do we do?
Yeah. So the unfortunate situation, and I hate that I have to say this, but I'm just going to put it out there. CBD, the vast majority of times, isn't going to give you the enhancement that you're looking for. The reality is that CBD is what I call, and I got this from someone else, I didn't come up with it, but I just love this word, a promiscuous cannabinoid, which means that it has shallow action, it has weak action at a lot of different receptor sites. This is the classic CB1 and CB2, but also on the TRP and VRP receptor, passive receptor sites. CBD just fits imperfectly and does some agonist and some partial agonist and some partial antagonist action at all of them. So it really, really is one of the cannabinoids that benefits the most from having other cannabinoids present and delivered in context for the entourage effect. Unfortunately, right now, it's the one that's being billed in isolation everywhere. And in terms of just scientifically, that is a really bad idea. So while I wish I could say, go out there and get your CBD only product and you'll have a great effect, that's not true. And
can I ask you though about, so my knowledge or understanding of a real benefit of CBD is an anti-inflammatory effect.
Yes.
So if somebody has a lot of irritation, a lot of inflammation, it's not going to be enhancement of sex, but it could be a reliever of some of the irritation, which could also be part of the problem. So if that's the case, if that is correct, what should we look for in a CBD only product? Because obviously that's going to be way more available. And what should we avoid?
Yeah. And I'll tell you exactly what to expect with CBD. I don't want to represent that it doesn't do anything, but don't go into it expecting that blood flow that THC brings. THC is really your powerhouse there. And so I do try to encourage people to try to use a THC product, if at all possible, for that effect. What CBD does is, as you said, it's a wonderful anti-inflammatory. Even gentle penetrative sex can result in micro tears, and it can help with that. It helps with particularly the spastic kind of contraction of the pelvic floor muscles and the vaginal muscles that is responsible for vaginismus, painful intercourse. So it can definitely be helpful for that. It helps with a general sense of relaxation, I've found. A lot of times, we walk around, those of us perceived as female, we have all this tension, right, that we carry with us all the time in our pelvic floor. And it does help to ease that. So I don't want to represent that it doesn't do anything. But it is a very different thing from THC. And I wish the THC stuff was available more widely. So if you are going to look for a CBD only version, if that's all that's available to you, with those appropriate expectations, you want to find a product that has a high potency, and that has been reputably tested, and preferably a company that posts their COA, their certificate of analysis, on their website for everyone to see, so that you can do your own research. You can look at various products online. They're all going to have websites. And you can look at their ingredients, make sure that their ingredients are, clean and compatible with the vaginal biome. And you'll then want to look at their potency and make sure that the testing that they did and the lab that they used are reputable. The potency, you need to be quite high to overcome the fact that CBD has this weak action. You need to crank the potency in order to get the effect that you're looking for. And as much as possible, if you have what's called a broad spectrum, as opposed to full spectrum, including THC, broad spectrum CBD then is going to have, except for THC, more of those cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids that help CBD do the best of what it does do. So those are the things you kind of want to keep in mind.
High concentration, what are we talking about? If we look at the label and it says 750 milligrams, 1,000, what are we looking at? Because obviously each application is only going to be a fraction of that.
Right. And I would look at that dosage size also. There are no studies, again.
Yes. You can never, and it's different for everybody. We know we always emphasize that. Yeah.
Always be prepared to try things multiple times to find the right dose for you. However, in my experience, in let's say a 2-ounce jar, like a little shot glass size thing, I would be looking for something about 500 milligrams combined cannabinoids in something that size, if you can get that. If you can't get that high, just get the highest potency that you can. And then you'll expect with that high potency that the product itself will be a little more bitter, but that's okay, because again, you're not really going to go immediately to oral sex with this. This is something that you want to give some time to soak in. And by the time you're actually getting down to business, it's not going to have that bitterness anymore because it will have absorbed. So,
but also I was thinking that when it comes to CBD products, if you do have a lot of irritation, could you be using them over the course of a couple of days leading up
Absolutely.
to?
Yeah.
So it could have some longer term effects by using it more in sort of a treatment fashion to help relieve some of the things. So by the time you end up having your encounter, there'll be less inflammation, less irritation, lots more relaxation, less tension.
Absolutely. And the difference, honestly, between these products that are marketed as ongoing, vaginal health or help with vaginal pain versus enhancing sex lubes is marketing. There's not a difference in formulation. The effect is the same. How you use them might be the same. You might use a smaller dose more regularly rather than a larger dose 20 to 40 minutes before. But really, they're the same product. At least they should be the same product.
Right. Okay. And it's just how they talk about the product to convince you that this is the product that you need. Yeah. Marketing. Yeah. Being a marketer, I get it.
I mean, they have to. It's okay. It's totally okay. But you need to be a really a consumer sleuth here. You need to look at the ingredients, look at the label always. And maybe if it's okay with you, let's talk about what to look at on the label.
Yes, I'm very much into. In fact, I was looking at my little cheat sheet. Ingredients, what are not compatible with the vaginal biome. And one other thing, I don't want to forget to ask this, but especially going back to the THC products, but any of these products, they combine a lot of other ingredients in them. But the question I want to make sure we answer is, if you're using the THC-oriented topical to do enhancement, and it's not adding the real lubricant, what kind of lubricant are we going to want to add on top of it? So let's first talk about ingredients, and then we can get back to that question.
Okay.
I sometimes have to put it out there so I can remember. Okay.
Definitely. So let's first talk about ingredients. There's three major ones that I talk about as kind of repeat offenders in the cannabis world that I see used all the time, that I'm just like, no, don't put that in.
Okay.
And they're mostly one of them overlaps with what you wouldn't want to find in a lube anyway, but that is unfortunately commonly used. So the first, let's talk with the most basic one, which is these oils that people are going to use. Oils that you use need to have a really small wax proportion, so that you're minimizing how long they kind of stick to your vaginal walls. And I'm speaking here, and this is a women's event, I'm speaking very, very specifically about, vaginal application, but just know that this applies for people with penises as well. They don't have a biome internally like we do, but there are some similar concerns. And if you have something that has too much wax, you can get a UTI on a penis for the same reasons that we might get a UTI or a vaginal infection. So,
okay, good point.
So you want to steer clear basically of anything that has mineral oil in it, which is just petroleum. And I hope we all know by now that petroleum is a bad, bad actor in the vagina. Do not use it. Don't use petroleum jelly. Don't use anything that says mineral oil, because that just means petroleum. Don't use shea butter or shea.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which might seem like a great idea because it's so nice on the skin, but it has a very, very high wax.
Very waxy.
Yeah, and the same is true of jojoba oil, which I would otherwise say is a fantastic choice because it is the oil that is closest to our own skin sebum, but it is still a little too high on the wax proportion. So these three. If it has that in there, steer clear. The good news is that almost anything else is appropriate. You can buy olive oil. Coconut oil is an all-time favorite. People love coconut oil for lube, and it goes really, really nicely with cannabis. I like to use a blend of either coconut oil, and you probably have this in Alaska too. The temperature change can cause your lube to be very different consistencies. So I like to use MCT, which is medium chain triglycerides. You can buy these at a health food store or order them online. It's just coconut oil that's liquid at room temperature. And it's something that many, many commercial producers of products use themselves. So get yourself some oil, and you can do the infusion yourself, or you can check the label for that. Okay. The other thing that I see way, way too often is glycerin.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
This is because glycerin is one of the ways that you can make a tincture with cannabis. So we've got the alcohol route, we've got the glycerin route. And glycerin is food for the bad actors in the vaginal biome. Okay. It is instant yeast infection or BV situation. So
BV.
Yeah, bacterial vaginosis. Okay. That's when you have basically your bacterial balance shifts, and whenever people talk about this like fishy thing or the fishy odor, like that is actually an illness. You have an issue. You have an infection. So that is when the bacteria is off balance, and one of those most surefire ways to have it get off balance is to introduce sugar. Glycerin is
sugar.
Yeah. Yeah. So the bad bugs can eat it and proliferate. There are some sweeteners that are safe to use vaginally because they are not, there's really only two, but they are not things that bacteria can eat. So
what are the two sweet sweeteners? Wait, sweet sweeteners. No, safe sweeteners. What are the two?
Stevia is fine.
Okay.
And xylitol, but don't quote me on the xylitol because there's also been some people talking about, well, maybe certain bugs can eat it under these circumstances. So okay. if you see a sweetener, if you see stevia on there, that's okay. But you certainly wouldn't probably see anything with sugar. But glycerin in particular is a common offender because people think that they can use it to do the extraction and then use that, and it's bad news vaginally. And then the other thing that you'll see is glycols. And glycols,
Glycols. How do I spell that?
Glycols.
C-O-S. Okay.
And this is anything with the word glycol after it. So
okay.
propylene glycol is the most common one. This is the one that everyone was all up in arms about in the vape cartridge.
The vaping, yeah.
And it's been kind of unfairly vilified because while it is a synthetic chemical, it does do some things really, really well and in a non-toxic way. But I don't think we should be ingesting it. And I don't think you should use it vaginally because of the fact that it is such an effective emulsifier, which means it helps oil and water make nice. Then it's very tempting to use it, and it goes by different names. There's gosh, I'm trying to type it out here. You'll see that on some labels, and that is
propanediol. Okay.
Yeah, propanidiol.
Propanidiol. Okay.
And that's propylene glycol that's been extracted from a natural source, but it's still propylene glycol. So you just want to keep an eye out for these things in cannabis topical products, in particular. Other than that, you just want to keep an eye out for all the stuff that we want to have for lubes generally. You want to make sure that you have a small ingredient list, that the ingredient, it's okay if you can't pronounce it. Like a lot of people say, if you can't pronounce it, it shouldn't be in there. And that's not true. Everything's got a chemical name. It's okay. But maybe Google it and figure out what it is. And maybe Google it plus vaginal health and see what kind of reports are there.
Sure. Okay. How about, do you know anything about herbs? Because a lot of these seem to have various herbs, and there are some herbs that have been used since ancient times for women's vaginal health. But in modern use and mixing it in with the THC and these other ingredients, do you have any comments on different kinds of herbs?
Yes. We had experimented with different herbal preparations. Ultimately, we went with the terpenes themselves rather than having to get complicated with herbs. Because
which terpenes are good or beneficial?
Oh, well, some of that I have to keep proprietary.
Okay, well, yeah. Don't give us your secret ingredients. But for example, like what does a terpene do in the vagina?
One of the things that terpenes do generally, and you'll see terpenes all over the place. They're one of the most studied and most included ingredients in topicals and in cosmetic products and beauty products. Like they're all over the place. So anytime you see linalool or limonene on a label, and it's usually there. If you go to grab the nearest product and look at the bottom, you'll see it hanging out near the bottom. They do various different things, but with the skin, some of them are able to enhance the absorption of cannabinoids and are able to basically reduce the amount of barrier that the skin, the amount of fight that the skin puts up to absorb things. And that's why they're present in so many products. So you can, and I won't say which exact ones or which proportions and everything, but you'll see if there's an increased terpene amount, it's probably a good thing in your vaginal products designed for vaginal use.
Well, I do know that limonene is used in so many topicals to enhance absorption. I mean, that is definitely, and linalool, I've never really heard it to enhance absorption, but it is also anti-inflammatory, relaxing as well. But I think from a topical standpoint, a little bit more on the anti-inflammatory side, soothing. So I would venture to guess, just based on my knowledge of terpenes in general, but probably you would not want something that's a little bit more caustic.
Right. So
Like,
you want to stay away from
yeah.
anything that has warming agents. Things
Mm.
like capsaicin and mannitol are used a lot of times to enhance cannabinoid absorption. They're great derm
Oh,
penetrants,
right.
but for obvious reasons, you probably wouldn't be using that vaginally. Um, and sometimes even warming lubes will have a component of that, but I
I've
still,
seen cinnamon.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen cinnamon.
don't do it.
Okay. Somebody actually,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was just saying, somebody asked kind of a little bit back toward the oils and such, cocoa butter.
Yeah. I saw that over
One of
there.
the brands has suppositories, THC, and they're
Mhm.
using cocoa butter. Uh, you had said something about the suppositories are supposed to very slowly dissolve and be absorbed,
Mhm.
but is it cocoa butter, yay or nay?
Yay. Yeah. Cocoa butter is like the gold standard, the classic thing that you would make a suppository out of because it melts at the right rate.
Oh,
And this is a risk benefit analysis. So, like, you're probably not using suppositories in the way that you would use a lube or a topical. This is something that, despite the fact that it hangs out more, is a risk you're willing to take, basically, because you're not doing a lot of other things that are going to upset the biome, and you want it to stay there for a while. You want it to stay there, sit against the cervix, sit against the upper part of the vagina, and deliver that relief.
and so we're talking relief now, which kind of goes into the conversation about dysfunction. So you mentioned a lot of reasons that there could be sexual dysfunction, and being able to keep the medicine closer to the area of pain and discomfort is a good thing. So, um, what what other ways can we make sex more pleasurable by removing some of these pain issues that are being caused by some pretty common conditions,
Yeah, very.
including menopause?
Yeah. Which is, yeah, majorly common. Or endometriosis, which is 10% of women have endometriosis. And I wanted to, real quick, I realized I was remiss in not mentioning the lube shooter, which that's the name that you would find it on online. I would call it an
Lube shooter.
applicator.
Oh, an applicator. Okay.
Lube shooter, but that's what they call it because it's designed for sex mostly. You would get a lube, and it's basically a syringe. It's like about the size of a tampon applicator, but it's designed to take the lube and put it up by the cervix so that the lube is kind of flowing down instead of having to rub it around outside. But this is perfect for using an oil to relieve menstrual cramps or any other kind of deep discomfort that you might be having. So a lube shooter, you would suck up the oil, whatever it is, the looser kind of texture, consistency, sorry. And you would apply that similar to the way that you would put in a tampon. And that actually has a pretty similar effect to a suppository if you don't have access to suppositories or don't want to use them for whatever reason. Yeah. So, oh gosh, brain work, back me up. What was the question you asked me before I went on about lube shooters?
Hold that thought, because I'm not quite sure, but we're going to go to a question that we have here. I have extremely painful menstrual cramps due to uterine fibroids, and cannabis is the only thing that has ever been able to ease that pain. Would a suppository be ineffective during menstruation? Since we're flowing, would you suggest using it leading up to your next period instead of during? Is there a recommended dosage to start with? So it's interesting because my other question that I had asked about the dilution of the cannabis product by introducing lubes, does it get diluted when you have your period and there's a flow? And then when you just mentioned this lube shooter, I was immediately going, oh, that would probably be really beneficial for this gal as well. So the idea of using it for that pain, the fibroids, the menstrual cramps are really bad. But when you get your period, is that going to kind of
like wash it out?
Wash it out.
Yeah.
And then also, if you're then putting in lubes, does that wash it out or weaken the effect?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for that question. And I'm so sorry that you're having to go through that. The thing that I would recommend doing, you're flowing, but I mean, you're not usually flowing at such a rate that you're going to not get any benefit. Still definitely use your suppository during menstruation. You don't probably get a whole lot of benefit from using it in the days up to when you're actually experiencing your symptoms. But when you're experiencing your symptoms, or as soon as you notice the onset and you're getting ready, you're like, this is going to hurt, go ahead and insert your suppository. Now what I'd like to recommend is you want to get it from both sides, basically. So insert your suppository or your lube on the applicator, lube shooter thing. Get it as deep as possible and as close to the cervix as possible, and pair that with a topical that has really good deep penetration on top of your uterus on your stomach. So you have kind of both, like you want to put it just right above your mons, right where your uterus would be. And you can pair that with a warming pad. And you can really knock it out if you also employ some systemic cannabis.
So smoking, vaping, tincture, edible. We hadn't even talked about edibles. We have a few minutes left, so we want to hit edibles. I was just going to ask though, when you said to put it on your stomach, on your belly, by the uterus, some states have patches.
Yes. Patches are going to be systemic, though.
Okay.
The only place that they will really work is those really thin areas like your wrist.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And they're just going to be the same thing pretty much as an edible. They tend to be pretty strong.
Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. So you're saying apply that cream down by where your uterus would be on the external while also putting something internally. And I think that sort of the doubling up of things tends to be very good. When I was talking about the bear spray in Alaska, a few little sprays under the tongue, total relaxation, and sort of that receptiveness. Few sprays elsewhere, the blood flow, that combination really seems to be an enhancement. And then on top of that is the lube as well. So multiple things.
With cannabis, it really seems to do it. Like the different routes really seems to like amplify it more than just the mere sum of them. It's like you're multiplying instead of adding somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just checking if there's any other questions. Someone was asking about THC products being shipped into New York, and you can't ship THC. You just can't ship THC. But New York, I know, has some great dispensaries and several women-owned or women-run dispensaries where I think you could get incredible advice and access to these products. I don't know about delivery in New York. I know there is obviously delivery in other places. There's curbside now with COVID. To be able to pick up your product without having to go into the dispensary. But I do know that New York State has several. Attain, I think, is one of them that's owned by a family of women, mom and daughters. So there are some states that you can access these products really easily. Obviously, the legal states, the THC products. But let's see, I can't find any sexual enhancement products in Portland, Oregon. Oh, there's some in Oregon, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. I am blanking. Oh my gosh. I can picture the bottle, but I can't remember the name right now. I'm
looking. Hold on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's got like 4 letters. And and you can order for you.
Not the THC though.
Not the THC, of course. No. You can do that. And I'm just like, why am I not I'm so sorry. I'm just
It's
not remembering the
it,
exact one.
it's one of those days, honestly.
I know it's been like that all day for me.
Okay, so I remember I knew this company before. I didn't know if they were still around. Luminous Botanicals
Mhm.
has a cannabis oil called Do Pleasure. And they're based in Oregon. I remember that, but I think I know which one you're talking.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's like they
Well,
use
there's
that.
Quim, but Quim is not Oregon. Quim is
Quim is not
California.
Oregon. Quim is
Quim is
California.
California. QUIM.
I've had I have a little bit of issue with their inclusion of tea tree.
I was going to say, because tea tree is extremely, or can be extremely caustic. And I've
Yeah,
seen debates about tea tree in the vaginal. Uh, yeah.
yeah.
So,
My issue with that inclusion is tea tree is an antifungal. And there was some research that was done. It was a very, very small amount. There was like 12 mice and 7 people that showed that people who had high levels, who smoked cannabis systemically, right, and mice that had systemic cannabis, had higher levels of systemic yeast. It was extrapolated from this very limited data that the use of cannabis topicals could cause yeast infections. And I don't think that follows. It's not to say that it doesn't necessarily, but that hasn't been something I've heard anecdotally. And the research really doesn't support that. So I think what Quim was doing is trying to offset this perception that cannabis itself, rather than the context in which it's delivered, could increase the chance of yeast infection. And that's what I think was going on. But for most women, for most people with vaginas, the regular introduction of tea tree is drying and unnecessary. So I think that having that in there as a matter of course is not supported by research and not a good decision is basically what I think.
Is the other one that you're talking about? I just found one called Empowers Foreplay, the number 4 and play.
I have seen that one. I remember Empowers. But I was going to say also, regardless of where you are, I really encourage people to make their own. And I'll even give you the recipe. It's so easy. It's so easy to do.
Can you send us a recipe and I'll email it out?
Yeah, I will. I'll just send you my standard recipe. It's a way shorter infusion time than making canna butter. We're not talking about having a crock pot for 8 hours and stinking up your whole house. It's a double boiler and a candy thermometer and 2 hours and you're done.
Wow. All right.
That way, just make sure you buy good quality flour and you can make it yourself and know exactly what goes into it.
I love this. All right. So everybody who's watching, make sure you sign up to our list. We'll share it with just the people on our list. Oh, hey. And Helene is also making her own right now with a double boiler. Wow. All right. We will get that recipe to all of you. Absolutely. There's been so much good information here, a lot of eye-opening stuff as well. I really appreciate it. We've come to the top of the hour. We need to say goodbye. I hate to do that because this is helpful. Again, this is the kind of stuff that we don't really hear about. If you are in a state that does sell THC products legally, just go on Google and go THC or cannabis. They call it weed lube or vaginal product, and see what comes up, because you will find often what happens, and I found this here in Alaska, is that the bud tenders don't want to talk about it. So they don't even mention it.
And sometimes you don't want to talk to them about it.
Yes.
You're going in there just talking to someone that looks like your grandpa or your son about this. I mean, it's
really awkward.
It's really inappropriate that these products have to be sold in pot shops because they're not trained sex educators and they belong in sex shops, not pot shops.
Yeah, we still got a long way to go. It's wonderful that there are states that are legal and we can get these products, but it's also very frustrating and confusing for a lot of us. So having this education, having you here, Chelsea, has been amazing. Thank you so much. We hope to have you back again.
If you come
And
back, I really, really, it's an honor to be back, and I'd love to work with you more. I have my own website, just check
great.
Cebara, Cebara, .com, and you can follow up with me there if you have any other questions that come up, or you can email me, chelsea@chelseacebara.com. If you have anything other, there we go, great. Anything else that comes to mind, I'm happy to help. I also do private consultations.
Oh, nice. Thank you for mentioning
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a quick question, no problem. But if you want to do like a little bit more in-depth thing, happy to do that. And yeah, I hope that you have a wonderful exploration with cannabis lubes and cannabis topicals for sex, and that it exceeds your expectations.
Yes, everybody, have great sex. All right. Well, hey, we're interested in women's wellness, and that is a part of wellness that we don't talk about enough, don't pay attention to enough. And it's the first thing that goes when we're stressed out.
Yes.
And it could be a stress reliever. So let's get to it, ladies.
Especially in these times, you have homework.
Let's all have homework. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everybody, again, and we'll see you next time.